By the way, how's the old lady doing? She must be dead by now, right? Taking care of her must have cost a fortune, and you must have been relieved when she passed, huh? Laughing, my ex-husband said this, and I just smiled back at him. My name is Samantha. I'm a single woman in my early 40s. Today, I went shopping a bit away from home, and while I was out, someone called out to me. Is that Samantha? I turned towards the voice and saw an older man and a much younger woman looking at me. Yep, it's Samantha, isn't it? Never thought I'd bump into you here. What are you doing around these parts? Looking closely, I realized it was my ex-husband, Timothy. I can do whatever I want. Goodbye. Hey, come on, it's been a while, don't be so cold. I was wrong back then. His words made me vividly remember what happened 9 years ago. Timothy and I got married when I was 25. 3 years into our marriage, we were distressed about not having children. I suggested we get fertility tests, but he replied, "What? Fertility tests? Why would I need to do that? This stuff is usually the woman's fault, you know." He never took it seriously. As I started to worry about infertility, Timothy began working late and often didn't come home until after midnight. He also started staying out without telling me, and just when I thought we needed to talk, his mother asked me to help her for a while because she had broken her leg and couldn't move. I'm really sorry about this. I got too confident and active for my age, and look what happened. No, I'm grateful to your mother. I'm doing this to repay the kindness she's shown me. Please rest and get better soon. My relationship with my mother-in-law was good, and since her house wasn't far, I visited her almost daily. But soon after, her condition began to change. Samantha, do you know where my wallet is? Isn't it in its usual spot? Usual spot? Where was that again? Look, it's right here. You always put it here, don't you? Oh, I'm sorry. I must have forgotten. As she started to forget more and became emotionally unstable, saying, I'm just a burden to you and Timothy, being so dependent and hardly able to move. It's worrisome, living like this. Maybe it'd be better if I were dead. Don't say that, Mother. Timothy and I are here for you, you can rely on us. No, being an old lady like me is just a burden. Maybe it would be better if I were dead. She suddenly started to cry, and her emotional instability continued for days. It made me think she might be showing signs of mild dementia, so I decided to talk to Timothy about it. Hey, about your mother, she's been forgetting things a lot lately, and she suddenly starts crying or getting angry. She can't move much because of her injury, and I think she might have mild dementia. Dementia? My mom? So, she's losing her mind? Don't put it like that. We haven't been to the doctor yet, so we don't know for sure. Then, can you take her to the doctor? If we get a diagnosis, we can plan what to do next. Despite his usual reluctance, Timothy proposed a proper approach, and I was pleasantly surprised and relieved. After all, it's his mother, and he cares about her. With that, I felt we could manage her care together. I hoped that Timothy might eventually come around to the idea of fertility treatments and that we might be blessed with a child. But that hope was quickly shattered. The day I took his mother to the hospital and returned home. I felt something was off about the house, and upon reflection, I realized Timothy's belongings were gradually disappearing. In a panic, I checked around the house and found that his clothes and valuables were neatly gone. I decided to call his company. Hello, is my husband there today? Timothy, right? He actually resigned a few days ago. Didn't you know, ma'am? Well, actually, his stuff is missing from our home. He might have been planning to disappear on purpose. I'm sorry to have to tell you this, ma'am, but there's a rumor that Timothy was involved with a temp worker from our company. An affair? Yes, that temp worker resigned a few months before Timothy. She left because she was having a baby, and there's a suspicion it might be Timothy's child. I'm sorry to have to bring this up. Thank you for letting me know. After hanging up, I was in shock for a while. Not only was Timothy having an affair, but he might also have a secret child. Timothy has always had a tendency to avoid difficult situations. When he heard that his mother might be developing dementia, he probably started thinking about running away. I couldn't just abandon her. But the thought of caring for her alone and earning a living felt overwhelming. From that day, I tried to keep it from her, but occasionally, I would be overcome with anxiety and start crying. Days passed, and just as I finally steeled myself for what was to come, the divorce papers arrived in the mail. That was 9 years ago. And today, I ran into Timothy, my ex-husband from 9 years ago. He spoke to me without any sign of remorse. "It's been 9 years, you've aged too. I almost walked right past you without recognizing you. I wish you had just walked past. Come on, don't be so cold. It's been 9 years. Let's just let bygones be bygones. It's not something I can just let go of. You always were vindictive. That's why I wanted to get away. Speaking of which, how's the old lady? She must be dead by now, right? Taking care of her must have cost a fortune, and you must have been relieved when she passed, huh?" Smiling back at Timothy, I replied cheerily. "She just passed away recently. Thanks to you disappearing, I ended up inheriting $12 million. $12 million? Timothy gaped in shock. "No way, that old lady couldn't have had $12 million. Oh, didn't you know? Your mother was into investing, like stocks. She was quite skilled and managed to make money without much loss. Little by little, it turned into $12 million. Impressive, right? Why would you get it then?" "Maybe as a thank you for the care. We couldn't get in touch with her own son." "No, you wanted that $12 million so bad you deliberately didn't contact me. That money should have been mine by rights." Who was it that cut off all ways of contact and vanished like a thief in the night? It's easy to look that up these days. You failed to do that, and that's why I didn't get the estate. It's just like you stole it. Well, if you're gonna say all that, I'll just give the estate to you. Surprised by my unexpected response, Timothy froze. "Is that okay with you?" "It's fine. I'm not his real child, and actually, I haven't even started the estate proceedings yet. So technically, I haven't received the $12 million yet. Maybe this reunion happened because your mother wanted to help me out when I was in trouble. Yay! I'm gonna be a millionaire. With $12 million, I could do anything I want." As Timothy drifted into his dream world, I smiled and made another suggestion. "There's a legal clerk I was planning to ask to handle the estate proceedings. Could you hand over your bank card to me so we can proceed?" "Wait, my bank card? You're not planning to withdraw my savings without permission, are you?" "I wouldn't do something that obvious. If you're worried, you can check the inherited amount later." My bad. Okay, I'll leave it to you." We exchanged contact information, and I proceeded with the estate in place of Timothy. Later, I received a call from Timothy after the $12 million had been deposited. "The $12 million is really in there. Thanks, Samantha." "That was your mother's money. You don't need to thank me." "Sorry, I suspected you were trying to hog the estate all to yourself." "It's okay. I think your mother would be happy to know her money went to her real son, Timothy. With $12 million, I can do anything. Thank goodness that old lady died." As I listened to Timothy's cheerful voice over the phone, I smiled and hung up. Nearly a year after I had handed over the estate to Timothy, my phone rang. It was Timothy. "Hello?" "Hey, Samantha. What's going on?" I could hear Timothy's panicked voice from the other end. "What do you mean, what's going on?" "Don't play dumb. You knew, didn't you? About the debt Mom had." "I knew. What about it?" After a moment of silence, Timothy started shouting again. "Why didn't you tell me about the debt?" "Why?" "Well, there wasn't a particular reason. You inherit the assets, of course, but inheriting debt is just as natural, isn't it?" Since you handled the inheritance proceedings, you should have explained it to me properly. Obligation? There's no such obligation, and I have no duty to tell you. What? What did you say? If you think obligations are so important, shall I remind you? Taking care of your parents is a duty of the real child. Timothy fell silent again. Didn't you find it odd when I said I'd give you the $12 million? After I had taken care of your mother for 9 years, why would I just hand over such a huge amount? Well, that's... I know. I know about the day you ran off with your affair partner, and by then, you already had a child with her. Despite us starting to talk about fertility tests, you were pretty lively outside. So, I was wrong back then. I was wrong, so forgive me. Words like that aren't enough to just let it go easily, you know. When I sharply rebuked him, the other end of the phone fell silent. Do you understand? Do you have any idea how desperate I felt that day, 9 years ago? When I realized I had to care for your mother alone and earn a living for both of us, everything went dark in front of my eyes. And then the caregiving continued for 9 years. Fortunately, your mother passed away before her dementia worsened, but those were still incredibly hard years. Someone like you, who runs away from trouble, will never understand how I felt. But she's gone now, right? You must be relieved. So, it's all good now, isn't it? Let me be clear, yes, there was debt, but it's true that I inherited $12 million, right? The amount I inherited is more than the debt. You can just pay off the debt with that $12 million estate. At my words, Timothy faltered awkwardly and fell silent. Indeed, there was debt in your mother's name, and it was a substantial amount. The debt was incurred when she developed dementia. She remembered that she had made investments, and she spent a lot of time in front of the computer. At some point, she had applied for loans online. I found out about this from a letter that was sent to us, and I was unsure what to do next. Since it was your mother's debt, it should be paid off from her savings. By that time, I was aware of her savings amount, which was high, but I considered it manageable given the size of her savings. However, I doubted that your mother, suffering from dementia, would settle her debts in one go. She might apply for more loans when I wasn't watching. While I was thinking about what to do, I came up with a plan for revenge against him. Bet you blew through that $12 million already, right? I doubt you spent it all, but you probably spent enough to exceed the debt amount, right? Well, that's not. Then there's no problem. Just pay it off from the $12 million estate. As Timothy mumbled excuses over the phone, I decided to let him in on the truth. Do you really think it was just coincidence that I met you right after your mother passed? What are you talking about? Exactly what I said. I orchestrated that meeting. I made sure to be at the big shopping mall in your neighborhood on weekends. It helped that you approached me fairly early on. Why would you do such a thing? Well, of course, so that you would inherit the estate. You probably wouldn't listen to anything coming from me, and given your dislike for hassle, you might have ignored communications from the legal clerk too. By making it seem like a coincidence and saying I inherited $12 million, I knew you'd start thinking about inheriting it yourself. How did you know where we were living? Did you hire a detective? No need for that, I just found out. That part was actually a coincidence. I'm remarried now, you know, and my husband is a doctor. Remarried? Since we're divorced, there's no issue, right? By the way, I met him through your mother. He was her doctor when she got sick. Someone really took a liking to a divorced older woman like you. That's more like my line. I can't believe you'd think about running away with someone who'd abandon his own mother. Just say whatever you want. As Timothy shouted, hit right on the mark, I waited for him to calm down before continuing. The only one saying whatever they want is you. Anyway, a few months before our so-called chance meeting, you went for a detailed checkup at my husband's hospital, right? Caught on a health screening, I hear. My husband saw your name and immediately knew it was you. He told me roughly where you were living. I had thought you'd run off much further away, but turns out you were quite close. Aren't you embarrassed? Didn't you ever think we might run into each other? Well, you probably chose a place close by because even thinking about moving far was too much hassle. Again, Timothy was silent, hit by the truth. When your mother's debts came to light, I had already planned my revenge. To carry it out, I just kept paying the interest on her debts without taking any measures to prevent her from incurring more. I knew you'd rely on me to handle the estate process since you hate dealing with troublesome things. You'd inherit without even knowing about the debts. And I predicted you'd squander the $12 million without thinking. It was quite amusing to see you do exactly as I expected. You bastard. It's misdirected to blame me, isn't it? I haven't done anything wrong. I just kept quiet about the debt. If you had taken care of the procedures yourself or checked with the legal clerk, you would have found out immediately. Even after inheriting, with $12 million, you could have paid it off in one go. If you're struggling, it's because of your own habit of running from problems. As Timothy continued to hurl insults over the phone, I decided to hit him with one more harsh reality. Oh, by the way, you haven't filed for inheritance tax, have you? What? What's that all about? You know what inheritance tax is, right? Since you inherited all that money, of course there's going to be taxes. That's pretty obvious, isn't it? How much are we talking about? I'm not a legal expert, so I don't know the exact figures. But from what I looked up before, it might be about $4 million. $4 million! Inheritance taxes are steep, aren't they? Plus, you have to file them yourself, and if you're late, there are penalties. And of course, you have to pay them with money. I can't pay that kind of money! Getting mad at me isn't going to help. I've said it multiple times, if you hadn't squandered your money, you could have afforded to pay it. Damn it! Maybe I'll have to consider filing for bankruptcy. I figured you might think that. Unfortunately, even if you declare bankruptcy, the obligation to pay taxes remains. What? Why is that? Don't ask me. That's just how the law works here. It's also a result of your ignorance and your tendency to run away from problems. I could tell that he was stunned on the other end of the phone. I decided to drop another bombshell on Timothy. Remember I mentioned my husband is a doctor? He's one of the doctors at the general hospital where you had your thorough checkup. So what? Well, he didn't examine you, but he saw your name and got curious about your test results. And what about it? Well, it looks like you might have cancer. What? Yeah, your diagnosis is probably cancer. That's a lie, right? Just because you want revenge, you can make up such a terrible lie. It's not a lie. You'll find out in a few days anyway. It's not confirmed yet, so don't worry. It's just a suspicion of cancer. But my husband did say it's almost certainly the case. Stunned by the shocking news, Timothy couldn't find his words. Well, you better hear the details from your primary doctor. The hospital is full of good doctors, including my husband. Your mother was well cared for by them too. Good thing you didn't get a terminal diagnosis from them. Well then, have a good rest of your life. After saying what I wanted, I hung up the phone. I felt like I had finally lifted a weight I had been carrying for 9 years. The next day, Timothy, half mad, apparently visited the hospital. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have said that. It's okay. Given what you've been through for 9 years, this is forgivable. I reported the entire conversation to my current husband, Raymond. It looks like Timothy squandered the fortune, couldn't pay off the debts, and he hadn't even started dealing with the inheritance taxes. It's questionable if he even knew about them. That's unbelievable that such adults exist. He's always avoided trouble. Whenever there's a problem, he runs away or dumps it on someone else. I remembered how my mother-in-law had cried during her lifetime. Her dementia progressed slowly, and for most of those 9 years, she could manage her daily life and communicate. The symptoms were sometimes memory confusion and emotional instability. Of course, she understood that her own son had abandoned and fled from her. Initially, I tried to hide it, but it was impossible to continue the pretense when her son didn't come home for days, then months. Hey, Samantha. I haven't seen Timothy for a while. Oh, come on, Mother. I told you, he's at work. But it's strange for him not to come home at all, right? It's not like he's at a job that requires him to be stationed alone. Could it be that Timothy has run away again? Moved by my mother-in-law's words, I felt I couldn't deceive her any longer and decided to tell her the truth. Actually, the day we went to the hospital, while we were gone, Timothy's valuables and clothes disappeared. When I called his company, they said he had resigned. Honestly, I'm still trying to figure out what to do. That's terrible. I'm so sorry my foolish son has caused this mess. He's always run from problems ever since he was little. But I never thought he would run away from me too. As my mother-in-law apologized and started to cry, I couldn't help but cry with her. After we both cried together, we discussed what to do next. As a result, I decided to quit my job and devote myself to taking care of her, and in return, she would provide for our living expenses for the time being. It was then that I learned about my mother-in-law's assets. I was astonished when I first found out. My mother-in-law even agreed to my plan to get back at Timothy. I have no more attachments to a son who abandoned me. After I'm gone, you can do whatever you like with my assets. Give Timothy a taste of his own medicine. With her blessing, I felt no hesitation in taking my revenge. And in her later years, as she began to show signs of dementia and incurred some debts, I gratefully used that situation to my advantage. I never expected things to work out this smoothly. If Timothy had checked even one thing or hadn't run away, at least financially, we wouldn't have faced any trouble. Well, a person who wouldn't run away or check wouldn't have dumped his mother on his spouse and fled in the first place. True. By the way, was Timothy okay after he became hysterical? He seemed a bit delirious, so I had security help, but there wasn't really a problem, so he's fine. After he calmed down, he just wanted the test results as soon as possible, so I happened to be free and explained it to him. That's good. No rampage or breaking anything in the hospital then? So, it's likely cancer? Yeah. It's not confirmed yet since we're still before the biopsy, but given his condition, it seems certain. However, I haven't told him that. I just said there's a suspicion of cancer and that we need another test. How did Timothy react at that moment? He was stunned, completely shell-shocked. I told him it's not confirmed yet and we don't know how advanced it might be if it is cancer, but he didn't seem to be listening. I see. But I don't feel sorry for him at all. That makes sense. After what he did to you, it's natural to feel that way. Thanks. I have to thank Timothy, though, for leaving such a wonderful person like you. If he hadn't run away, we wouldn't have met at your mother's side and gotten married. It's unimaginable to me that someone would leave a wonderful person like you. We smiled at each other. By the way, besides providing for living expenses, my mother-in-law also made gifts to me. It was a lifetime gift, within the tax-free limit, given to me every year. Thanks to that, I was able to have a child with Raymond. Raymond and I started dating while my mother-in-law was still alive, but we didn't get married until after she had passed away. I had to settle scores with Timothy first, so I asked Raymond to wait. After she passed, I let Timothy inherit as planned and then accepted Raymond's proposal. I had told Raymond that I might be infertile. Since Timothy had managed to have a child elsewhere, assuming the problem was with me. Raymond was supportive, but I wanted to have a child with him, so I decided to undergo fertility testing. Raymond agreed to get tested as well. The results showed that the problem was indeed with me, so we started fertility treatment early. We used the money my mother-in-law gifted us for the treatment. And thankfully, the treatment was successful, and now I'm pregnant. I believe this child is not only desired by Raymond and me, but was also something my mother-in-law wished for. We don't know what kind of life this child will lead, but the one thing I want to teach is not to run away from problems. That's for sure. Raymond and I looked at each other and burst into laughter. I'm sure my mother-in-law was laughing along with us wherever she is. Later, it turned out that Timothy was indeed diagnosed with cancer. And it was pretty advanced. He was given only 6 months to live. It turns out that Raymond became Timothy's primary doctor by chance. Timothy has no idea that his current primary doctor is his ex-wife's new husband. Timothy has been opening up bit by bit to Raymond about his current situation. Apparently, as soon as his wife, who was his affair partner back then, found out he had cancer, she left him. Though he had run away himself, he seemed quite upset about his wife running away and had plenty to complain about. Moreover, his wife is demanding a divorce and child support, and when he told her he couldn't afford the child support because of his medical expenses, she denied him any visitation with his child. "Doctor, I don't have any money. I probably won't see my child again, and nobody seems to care about me. Why did my life end up so lonely?" Timothy reportedly broke down and cried as he said this. "I might have felt sorry for him if I didn't know the whole story, but knowing the truth, I could only think it was karma," Raymond told me with a wry smile. After he is discharged, Timothy plans to file for bankruptcy. However, he can't escape from taxes, so he's hired an accountant to first try selling off whatever he squandered to pay his taxes. As a result, he'll be moving to a very modest living situation. Since he's telling Raymond, just his doctor, all these details, Timothy must be really lonely now. Having once known luxury, to now face a limited time left, living alone in a small apartment without even seeing his child. No one is left to clean up his life's messes. It's quite a fall from grace. But given his choices, it's his own doing. "Listen to me, I'm gonna divorce you." Facing my adamant refusal, Jack blurted that out. Next to him, Catherine was saying, "Please take care of us soon." I thought I had been devoted to Jack and Catherine, but apparently, I was mistaken. For them, living together seemed to be the ultimate act of filial piety. I've been turning down the idea of cohabitation for about 5 years, but it seems I've reached my limit. I do as Jack says and pack my things to leave the house. A few days later, I received hundreds of calls from Jack. "My name is Natalie. I'll be turning 48 this year. Jack and I have been married for about 20 years. We weren't head over heels in love even when we were dating. Jack seemed indifferent to romance, and I didn't think he was that interested in it. We have one child, but he's already moved out, so it's just Jack and I in the house. Jack has a rather dominating personality, a tad intimidating. But given my laid-back nature, I never really minded his quirks too much. We've been together since high school, and though I hesitated when Jack proposed, I eventually decided to marry him. In the early days of our marriage, I was a stay-at-home wife, taking care of the household and attending to tasks given by my in-laws. After some time, our child was born, and the enthusiastic grandparents would often visit our place. Initially, I was told that living with in-laws was off the table. I wouldn't want to live with my parents always around. It'd be stifling. We're never gonna live with them. I believed those words and decided to marry Jack. However, as our child grew older, out of the blue, Jack proposed living with his parents. Sure, our child became more independent, and in a few years, he'd be off to college. But I was against the idea of living with my in-laws, and I made it clear every time the subject came up. We had several discussions about cohabitating, and I rejected them all. Every time, Jack would become grumpy. Maybe he thought I'd eventually agree? There were mainly 2 reasons why I didn't want to live together. Firstly, I didn't get along with my mother-in-law, Catherine. Shortly after our marriage, I was often summoned to my in-laws' place. Since I wasn't working at that time, I'd always rush over if they needed any assistance. But even when I hurried, Catherine would complain, "You're late. How long do you think I've been waiting? The TV isn't working, please check it." And it wouldn't even be urgent matters. At first, it felt like minor nuisances, but over time her actions escalated. During a family gathering, everyone was served lunch except for me. They had ordered sushi for the day, and there wasn't any for me. So, I had no choice but to eat alone at a nearby diner. As Catherine's blatant acts of hostility increased, I tried discussing it with Jack once. "I think your mom has been giving me a hard time." I was hesitant to talk about it, but can you maybe speak to her? I tried to approach it gently, but Jack took it as criticism. Feeling that I had insulted his mother, he got furious and gave me the cold shoulder for a while. That made it even harder for me to confide in him. From that point on, I felt Jack's attitude towards me changed. He was never the type to help around the house, but he used to assist when I asked. However, after discussing Catherine, he started ignoring even my simplest requests. While I kept refusing the cohabitation, Jack's mood worsened even more. Not only did his demeanor change drastically, but he also began coming home late and even hinted at having an affair. Not only did Jack's attitude change drastically, but he also stopped coming home. Moreover, he even began to make comments hinting at infidelity. "I'm going out for drinks with a lady tonight, so I'll be late," Jack would say, only to return home the next afternoon. This went on for about 4 years. Even if the love is waning, no one can stand being treated like that by their spouse. I became so worn out that even my kids began to worry about me. My friends also started telling me, "You look thin. I mean, more worn out. You should eat properly and get some rest." Although I knew I needed to do something, I couldn't bring myself to act. That's when a friend approached me with a job offer at her flower shop. One of my friends owned the shop and had a vacancy. She thought it might help lift my spirits. When I told Jack and Catherine about my new job, they casually remarked, "It's good you're working. We need to support ourselves." That's true. We could live on Jack's salary, but I'd feel better knowing Natalie has an income, Catherine chimed in. Of course, I planned to contribute to household expenses since I lived with Jack. But that doesn't mean I'm doing it for Jack or Catherine. Working at the flower shop lightened my mood, and people began to say I looked happier. When I was a stay-at-home mom, I felt down dealing with Jack and Catherine all the time. However, interacting with various people at the shop made me realize how much I enjoyed working. This newfound happiness made me less inclined to go home. I'd often lie to Jack about working late, just to avoid seeing him, or go out to dinner with friends. This went on for about a year. About 5 years after we started discussing living together, Jack called me for a talk. He began pointing out that I had been spending a lot of time outside, my spending habits had become reckless since I started working, and I wasn't doing household chores anymore. Then, he stated that someone as lazy as me was not needed in the house. To add insult to injury, he said he would forgive everything if I agreed to move in with him. I firmly refused as usual. But just then, Catherine, probably waiting in the next room, burst in. "Why are you so against moving in? Did I do something wrong?" she smirked. Jack defended her, saying Catherine hadn't done anything and that it was just my bad attitude. I reiterated my decision not to move in with them, but it seemed they didn't get the message. Jack threatened, "You better start listening or I'm gonna file for divorce." Catherine jumped in, "Please take care of us soon." Though I had endured so much, that day was the last straw. While I kept things calm at the moment, the next day, I decided to pack my things and leave the house. I waited until I was sure Jack was at work to make my move. I couldn't take everything, so I packed only the essentials. Contemplating where to go, I realized my only option was to turn to my parents. When I called them, they were happy to come pick me up. Honestly, I thought my mom would be angry, since she'd previously urged me to get married. However, after explaining the situation, she told me to come back. A few hours after the call, my parents arrived in a large van. Apparently, they had rented a big vehicle just for this. Feeling loved, I decided to move all my belongings out. That night, I received a call from Jack, who probably had finished work. "Hey, I noticed your stuff is gone from the house. You're not actually thinking of getting a divorce, are you?" he said. I let him know that's exactly what I was planning. I pointed out that the business card of a divorce attorney was on the table and told him from now on to communicate through the lawyer. Jack was livid. "Where are you now? Come back. I'll teach you a lesson," he started shouting threats. I've never experienced physical violence from Jack before, but this time, it might be best not to talk to him directly. Caught off guard by the mention of a lawyer, Jack hesitated for a moment but soon started throwing insults again. I could hear Catherine in the background, yelling, "Forget about her. I'll find someone even better for you. If you get divorced now, you can choose from a bunch of girls." Catherine probably doesn't know what's gonna happen to Jack next. However, if she agrees to a divorce in any form, it's convenient for me. Jack started listening to Catherine's words, and seemed to be leaning towards the idea of a divorce. And then, he said, "You sure you want to divorce me? You ain't gonna find another good man like me anytime soon," and hung up the phone. After that, there was no contact from Jack or Catherine, and I enjoyed a moment of peace at my parents' house. The flower shop where I work is managed by a friend, and thanks to their consideration, I was allowed to take some time off. At my parents' house, I enjoyed my mom's home-cooked meals and had a drink in the evening with my dad, forgetting the bad stuff. However, I guess Jack got a call from the lawyer because he started calling me angrily again. I told him to communicate through the lawyer, but did he not listen? The reason why Jack kept contacting me was clear. I had gathered evidence that would be beneficial for me during the divorce. For a long time, Jack often hinted at cheating. I was initially shocked, but I had a feeling we might divorce someday, so I recorded conversations just in case. He wasn't actually cheating, but it was true he went out for dinner with another woman. This was confirmed by a local private investigator. With this information alone, it wasn't enough to claim he cheated, but because I had his recorded statements, I could present it as evidence of his affair. Jack was furious about this and kept calling me. I didn't need to be in touch with Jack anymore, but I couldn't help but wonder how he'd react, so I answered the phone. The first thing he blurted out was, "What the heck is this? I haven't cheated on you. Where's the evidence, huh? Is this some kind of fabrication? Cut the crap. Do you enjoy tarnishing my reputation? And you want to claim compensation for the emotional stress I've supposedly caused you? If anything, I should be the one asking." He was shouting at the top of his lungs. He was so loud that his voice distorted and I couldn't hear some parts. Given how aggressive Jack was, I expected he'd be reluctant about the divorce. But a few days later, for some reason, he easily agreed to it. The reason being, Catherine ended up covering the compensation fee. I was surprised that Catherine had that kind of money, but if it meant he'd agree to the divorce, it wasn't an issue. I decided to accept the offer from Jack's side. After consulting with my attorney, we ended up slightly reducing the compensation amount. But it can't be helped. It's common to ask for a bit more initially and then reduce the amount later, to make it easier for the other party to accept. Just when I thought I could finally get the compensation and get divorced, it seems it won't be that easy. Just when the divorce seemed to be finalized, Jack decided to return to his in-laws' place. But when he got there, he found Catherine and her father, Kenneth, fighting. The reason was Catherine's affair. Jack, who happened to be there, got an earful from Kenneth as well. "Are you two kidding me? Even though you have your life partners, you let your hearts be stolen by someone else. I've been patient till now, but I can't take it anymore. Both of you, get out." "No. I haven't cheated on anyone. If you say I have, show me the evidence." Catherine was defiant against Kenneth, but she was speechless when Kenneth showed her the photos. The photos showed Catherine arm in arm with her lover. Catherine had no words when presented with the undeniable evidence. On the other hand, Jack said, "I didn't cheat. This is something Natalie did on her own. The evidence shown is fake. It's a frame-up. There's no need to kick me out too." But Kenneth wasn't hearing any of it. Their argument was so loud, the entire neighborhood could hear it. Or so I heard later from a friend who lived nearby. They say like father, like son, but this seemed too much. Just like me, Kenneth had gathered evidence of Catherine's infidelity. Unlike Jack, Catherine really did cheat. She had been cheating for about 5 years, and Kenneth had noticed a while ago. Once he realized, he hired a private investigator and gathered evidence of her infidelity. Not only did Kenneth have photos of Catherine cheating, but he also had emails with content suggesting an affair. Catherine wasn't good with smartphones and hadn't set a password, so it was possible to gather the emails as evidence. Later, given our similar situations, I had a chance to talk with Kenneth. That's when he showed me the photos he used as evidence. The photos I received from the private investigator were pretty clear and showed evidence of cheating. Just having their arms around each other isn't enough proof, but the content of the texts clearly showed infidelity. From my own experience, I understood how important evidence really is. My lawyer even said, having evidence puts you in a significantly better position. In Natalie's case, there are recordings, so even if there wasn't actual cheating, it proves that the marital relationship has severely broken down. You can definitely get a divorce. The difference between me and Kenneth was whether we were considering divorce. By the time I had gathered enough evidence, I was already prepared for the possibility of divorce. However, even after Kenneth found proof of infidelity, he continued with his married life. He said he continued the marriage because of the deep bond formed over the years they spent together. After the divorce, when Kenneth told me this, it reminded me of how I felt. When you spend years with someone, there's a point where you realize you're together more out of habit than love. If both parties communicate well during these times, it's probably not an issue. In reality, couples who've been together for years, or married couples who've been together for decades, communicate well. Kenneth and I just chose the wrong partners and couldn't manage that. Jack had a hard time with Shuji and Catherine, but in the end, the two were thrown out of their home. Having nowhere to go, they reluctantly ended up in a monthly apartment. It seems like Jack and Catherine were quite alike, often spending recklessly at convenience stores and buying unnecessary branded items. That's why they had hardly any savings when they were evicted. The reason I knew about their lack of savings is because they begged me to lend them money for the monthly apartment's rent. I had already divorced Jack and hadn't received any alimony from him, so I didn't lend him any money. So, if they could afford a monthly apartment, they must have borrowed money from relatives or acquaintances. However, monthly apartments have month-to-month contracts, so they'll have to leave after a month. Right now, people are keeping their distance from Jack. The reason is that I told everyone about what Jack did. Jack and I had been dating since our college days, so we had many mutual friends. Coincidentally, soon after our divorce, I was invited to a reunion. At the reunion, there were updates on everyone's lives, and I was asked about what I was doing now and how things were with Jack. I didn't think lying was right, and I had nothing to hide, so I honestly reported everything Jack and Catherine had done. Some classmates had lent money to Jack and were angry about the way he approached them. That guy always has an excuse for not paying back. I lent him $1,000 thinking of our old friendship. Guess I'll have to write that off. But I never imagined he'd do something so terrible to Natalie. I wish she had confided in us, one said, while also taking my side. Since then, my interaction with friends increased, and Jack lost his. Having no one left to borrow from, Jack began visiting supermarkets late at night, looking for half-priced ready-made meals. The reason I know this is because I ran into him at a supermarket just before closing. Jack kept walking back and forth in the deli section, waiting for the half-price stickers to be applied. Finally, when they did put half-price stickers on the meals, Jack headed to the cashier. But it seemed he didn't have enough money, even with the discount. "Can't you just discount it by a few cents? It's no big deal. If the cashier can't be flexible, I'm gonna complain," he shouted and stormed out of the store. I didn't want to bump into him, so I waited for a while before leaving. But even after 30 minutes, Jack was still outside the supermarket. There was someone there arguing with him. "Why couldn't you buy it? It's strange. I'm starving, and I haven't eaten anything today. Do something and get some food." The person arguing with Jack was Catherine. From their conversation, it seemed they were struggling even to eat that day. Trying not to be noticed, I pulled my hat down further and left the supermarket. After finalizing my divorce with Jack, I decided to re-enter the workforce. I was really surprised when I found a company willing to hire me on a contract basis at my age. I made up my mind to work hard to give back to this company. I had always thought I wasn't cut out for work, but as I tackled challenges head-on, I began to receive positive feedback. Most of my managers in the department are younger than me, but thanks to their thorough training, I can see my skills growing. Initially, I was just a contractor, but recently they approached me about becoming a full-time employee. With a full-time position, there'll be more opportunities and challenges. And naturally, I'll earn more money. I've been saving up since my single days, enough to afford a house. Now that I've divorced Jack, I don't plan on remarrying. So, I decided to buy a condo when I got the promotion. In the past, I bumped into Jack and Catherine at a local Walmart, so part of my reason for moving was to avoid running into them. If we live in the same area, we might bump into each other again. As of now, Jack hasn't tried to reconcile or asked for money, but you never know. Friends and family advised me to move as far away as possible. The new place is a bit far from work, but it's well connected, so I can easily go shopping downtown. The condo is just right for a single person like me, not too big, but spacious enough. Now, I'll have to work even harder to pay off my mortgage. But, after living there for about 6 months, I started to feel a bit lonely. I don't plan to remarry, and it's a bit too small for roommates. Just when I was pondering this, I found a stray kitten outside my apartment. I decided to watch it for a while, thinking its mother might show up. I thought the mother cat might show up and take the kitten away at some point, but the next day, the kitten was still in the same spot outside my apartment building, crying just like the day before. With winter approaching, I couldn't bear the thought of it freezing outside, so after consulting with my building manager, I decided to adopt it. The building allows pets, and as long as I take care of it, there's no issue. This playful kitten runs to me as soon as I get home. She's not picky with food and often snuggles into my bed during cold mornings. I wasn't particularly fond of cats before, but now I can't imagine life without her. I even show off her pictures at work, and I'm always talking about how she's the cutest. They say my child is the cutest, and I find myself oddly agreeing with that. I have a few friends who also have cats, so it's reassuring to know I can ask them for advice. These days, I look forward to coming home to my waiting cat. I live with my son, so you need to leave. Suddenly, my mother-in-law I'm living with threw those cold words at me. I thought I have always been good to my mother-in-law. I've always tried to make sure she didn't have any inconveniences, but it seems my mother-in-law never noticed. There have been times when my mother-in-law treated me poorly, and I have grown resentful of her. Finally, I was like, I'll gladly leave. I haven't intended to say that, but I thought that was probably how I truly felt. My husband is away on a business trip. The only one who'd be in trouble if I left would be my mother-in-law. The luxurious life she's been enjoying in the city is because of me. Had my mother-in-law forgotten that? With these thoughts, I've decided to leave the house. My name is Catherine. I'll be turning 38 this year. My husband and I have been married for 10 years, and we both work. We once considered having children, but the doctor told me it would be difficult for me to conceive. I was told natural conception was nearly impossible, and we considered fertility treatments. However, after many discussions, my husband and I decided not to have children and to enjoy our lives together. Then, my father-in-law got sick and passed away. My mother-in-law had bad knees and living alone in the family home was tough. We thought about hiring a caregiver, but for safety reasons, it seemed best if she lived with us. We were planning to build a house at that time, so we designed it with a room for my mother-in-law in mind. For her convenience, given my mother-in-law's bad knees, we installed a small bathroom, kitchen, and toilet on the first floor. On the second floor, we have our own bathroom and kitchen, thinking my mother-in-law would be comfortable. Though it went over our budget, we felt it was the best decision considering my mother-in-law comfort. It showed our consideration and kindness. But it seemed my mother-in-law didn't see it that way. I could tell from my mother-in-law's behavior since she started living with us. I never had a bad impression of her before, but recently she's become more aggressive toward me. Moreover, my mother-in-law always becomes more aggressive when my husband's not at home. My husband is in sales, and recently he's been traveling abroad more often. While he used to have day trips frequently, it's different with overseas trips. He often stays away for about a week per trip. That very day, my husband mentioned he'd be on an international business trip for about a week. After sending my husband off early in the morning, I began getting ready for work. Suddenly, I heard my mother-in-law's loud voice from downstairs. "Hey! Come down here right now." Wondering what the fuss was about, I quickly headed to the first floor, but everything looked normal. My mother-in-law was just sitting in the living room, watching TV. I had assumed there was some sort of emergency. Then she was like, "Why are you just standing there? Hurry up and make my breakfast." I had never prepared breakfast for my mother-in-law before, as my husband and I both have full-time jobs and she always made her own. I wondered what had changed. Maybe she wasn't feeling well? I suggested she might need to see a doctor, but she was like, "I'm perfectly fine. Can't you see? Shouldn't my son's wife take care of me?" I've heard other households serve a 3-course breakfast every morning. Turns out, the family she was referring to lives together just like us, but the wife is a homemaker. So, she prepares meals 3 times a day. I tried to explain that my husband and I both work, so it's impossible for me to cook in the mornings or midday, but my mother-in-law just turned the TV volume up in frustration. I figured she didn't want to hear what I had to say, so I decided not to say anything more. That day, after finishing work and returning home, I found my mother-in-law waiting for dinner. I made lasagna that my mother-in-law loves, but she was like, "What's this? It's way too salty," and threw all the food I prepared into the trash. After that incident, my mother-in-law became very domineering, constantly picking on me and nitpicking everything I did. When things got unbearable, I confided in a friend who suggested it might be bullying by mother-in-law. Upon researching online, I found numerous similar stories from other my mother-in-laws. As my mother-in-law's behavior continued to worsen, I decided to have a heart-to-heart conversation with her. I took a day off from work and approached her during the day. I was like, "Hey, why have you suddenly started acting so hostile? We've always lived in harmony. If I've done something wrong, let me know. But if you don't talk to me, I won't know how to make things right." However, she didn't seem interested in listening. When I patiently faced my mother-in-law, she eventually started to speak. Apparently, she had become envious after hearing about a family she'd talked about some time ago. In that family, there are 2 kids, a daughter and a son, and the couple lives with the husband's parents. Their home is more spacious than ours, and she's envious because they have coffee with many guests. She mentioned that she wished to spend her retirement in such a manner. Our home isn't necessarily small. In our neighborhood, it's actually considered quite large. We have a backyard big enough for barbecue parties, and I told her we could host home parties without any issues. But she felt inferior and believed she couldn't compete, hence not inviting anyone over. Our conversation didn't conclude with any resolution. However, a few days later, an incident occurred. As I was leaving for work, a lady from across the street was staring at me. Moreover, I noticed people whispering and glancing my way elsewhere. Wondering if there was something odd about my attire or makeup, I checked but found nothing amiss. I discovered the reason for the whispers that evening. On my way home from work, one of the neighbors approached me and said, "Hey, I've heard some rumors, violence ain't right." Violence? I was taken aback. Digging deeper, the rumor was that I had become violent with my mother-in-law. It was said that the confrontation took place on the day we had that discussion and that I even told her to leave if she continued with her lavish lifestyle. I have no memory of doing such a thing and had no intentions of ever doing so. After explaining, the lady thought for a moment and was like, "If that's true, it's really not good." The whole neighborhood's buzzing with this story. I've heard that she's been approaching others, wanting to discuss it and sharing stories of your alleged violence. For a while, I was labeled in the neighborhood as the violent wife. I managed to bear it until about 5 days after my husband left on a business trip. Finally reaching my breaking point. I felt I needed to talk to my husband first, but I couldn't muster the courage to bother him with this during his busy trip. So, I decided to first communicate my feelings to my mother-in-law. I've noticed you seem to have taken a disliking to me this past week. You're my husband's mother, and I wanted us to live comfortably together. No matter how hard I try, it seems I can't change how you feel. Perhaps it would be best if we consider living separately. My mother-in-law looked taken aback by my suggestion for a moment, but then she was like, I agree. I never really liked you from the start. Living in this fancy house on my son's dime and acting as if you've done it all. A woman who doesn't even have kids and only works has little value in my eyes, and scoffed. At that point, I wondered what my mother-in-law was misunderstanding. Because, you see, I bought this house. From the down payment of the mortgage, everything's been on me. I had explained it when we built the house, but I wonder if my mother-in-law has forgotten. Moreover, I'm the one covering the living expenses. My mother-in-law gets an allowance from my husband and spends it carelessly, but that's also coming out of my salary. Even though my husband is working hard, he's not making as much as expected, and his income is lower compared to mine. So, the agreement was that we'd cover our living expenses from my income and save whatever my husband made, since we don't have kids and for our future. Before we moved in together, my husband had explained this to her, and he had warned her not to be wasteful. Ever since my husband left on his business trip, my mother-in-law has been watching TV infomercial every day and making phone calls. She probably ordered something. As I was thinking about all this, she started saying things like, she was like, I'm gonna live here with my son. You should leave. I'll discuss the rest with my son. If my son wants, you might even consider a divorce. So, be prepared for that. At this point, I realized it's useless to argue. Once I gave up, I was like, I'll gladly leave, quickly packed my largest suitcase, and decided to leave the house with all I could carry. Before leaving, I glanced at my mother-in-law, and she was smirking at me. She laughed aloud and was like, oh, leaving so soon? That's not too bad of you, but maybe you could be a bit more charming? Honestly, I don't remember doing anything to upset my mother-in-law this much. Whenever my mother-in-law asked for a ride, I would provide one. I tried my best to spend time with her, so she wouldn't feel lonely. We haven't given her the joy of grandkids, and I work. However, that's the life choice we made as a couple, and my mother-in-law has no right to dictate that. As anger surged within me, I thought my mother-in-law'd be the one regretting this in the end. With that thought, I left the house with my heavy luggage. When told to leave, I wondered where I'd go. My childhood home is a plane ride away, and I couldn't abandon my job. Also, I didn't want to worry my parents. The first place that came to mind was my office. I run my own business, a small cafe. I employ 2 students as part-time, but primarily I manage it on my own. The cafe is in a 1-story house, with the extra space used as an office and storage. Though it's a small house, there's enough space for someone to live. I usually drove from home to the office, but living at the office would cut down the commute. Now, I won't need to cook for my mother-in-law anymore, which means more time for work. As someone passionate about my job, I got excited thinking about the extra working hours while setting up a living space in the office. I cleared out the piles of cardboard boxes and decided to sleep on the blanket I had laid out for napping. I also arranged a table and chairs to make work easier. By evening, 2 student part-timers came in for their shifts. They were surprised to see the office looking different, but once I explained the situation, they readily understood. They were even like, let us know if you need anything. We'll help out wherever we can. At that moment, I felt grateful for hiring them. They're such kind-hearted individuals, and they've received excellent feedback from our customers. I've been checking the reviews for our cafe daily, and besides the ambience and the quality of food, many patrons praise the service provided by the part-timers. I had been thinking about raising their pay when I received a call from my husband, who was supposed to be on a business trip. I could only check the message around 9 p.m. My husband mentioned he got home earlier than expected. However, upon arriving, he noticed a lot of my belongings were missing. He confronted my mother-in-law. But my mother-in-law wouldn't spill the beans about my whereabouts. After pressing her for about an hour, she finally explained. My husband then realized I had left due to issues with my mother-in-law and quickly tried to contact me. There were several missed calls, but considering my husband didn't show up at my workplace, I appreciated his understanding of my situation. Feeling guilty about making him worry, I called him back. Without delay, my husband answered, asking what had happened. I was hesitant about whether to be honest about everything, but my husband's persistence made me spill the truth. I briefly explained what my mother-in-law had done to me, and I could tell from my husband's voice that he was furious. He wanted to talk as soon as I finished work. After locking up the cafe and office, I headed home. I had never seen my husband this mad before. Thus, the thought of meeting my husband in this state was intimidating. I reached home around 10 p.m. and noticed that only the lights on the first floor were on. My husband and my mother-in-law must be in the living room. When I tried to unlock the door, my key wouldn't fit. I knocked at the door, and my husband came out to unlock the door. As I entered the living room, there sat my mother-in-law with a sulky expression. Apparently, after I left, she had changed the locks without telling anyone. My husband hadn't noticed earlier since the door was unlocked when he got back from his trip. My husband immediately wanted to hear the whole story from me, so I told him about the incidents over the past week. I explained how my mother-in-law suddenly became overbearing, wouldn't listen during our talks, and went as far as spreading lies about me to the neighbors. Every time I pointed this out, she would accuse me of lying. However, when my husband insisted on hearing everything, she just went silent. After I finished speaking, it was my mother-in-law's turn. My mother-in-law claimed I was violent towards her and wouldn't stop, even when she asked me to. She mentioned she had talked with neighbors, but the harassment from me only seemed to increase. She even began to say that if the neighbors were asked, they would know all about my doings. I wondered what made my mother-in-law so confident to make such outrageous claims. The conversation seemed to be going in circles, and there was no clear conclusion. So, I decided to show something to my husband. I had been collecting video and audio footage. With just a few taps on my smartphone, I could record instantly, and over the past week, I had recorded every time my mother-in-law made snide remarks. Whenever I had the chance, I would prop up my phone to capture my mother-in-law harassing me on video. The footage showed my mother-in-law yelling at me to make dinner and even calling me defective for not having children. Seeing this, my husband was furious, his face turning bright red. On the contrary, my mother-in-law looked pale as if she had seen a ghost. In a desperate attempt to save face, she was like, "This isn't right, Catherine. It's just a misunderstanding. It seems like I'm the bad one, but that's because you cut out the parts where you were being mean. In reality, you've done much worse to me." But my husband, who had experience with video editing, wasn't convinced. If the video had been edited unnaturally, he would have noticed right away. It seemed like my husband completely trusted me. Just as I hoped, he began considering living separately from my mother-in-law. Despite my mother-in-law's vehement objections, my husband seemed firm in his decision. For the time being, I decided to stay at an office. During this period, we discussed whether to live separately and how to go about it if we decided to. Eventually, a conclusion was reached. We were going to send my mother-in-law to a nursing home. We had been against this idea before we moved in together. It seemed like a secure environment where she'd be looked after 24/7. However, my mother-in-law had always said she didn't want to go into a facility. I thought that if she did, it would be incredibly stressful for her. But, my husband revealed he had been considering this option for a while. With my mother-in-law's bad knee and both of us working, we just couldn't give her the attention she needed. He believed that the only way to ensure her safety was for her to be in a facility. However, my mother-in-law really pleaded not to be put in a facility, but my husband didn't budge. My husband isn't someone who shows it much, but he really adores me. I started dating him due to his relentless pursuit, and from the time we began our relationship to our marriage, things moved incredibly fast. After getting married, my husband was always helpful around the house and always seemed to put me first. So, I kind of saw it coming when he took my side over my mother-in-law's. My mother-in-law apparently hadn't noticed and assumed my husband would be on her side. But when she was told my mother-in-law'd be placed in a facility, she quickly apologized to me. However, my husband was still upset and didn't listen to anything my mother-in-law said. During all this, I was focusing on running my cafe. Initially open from lunchtime, I began opening it for breakfast and started serving alcohol in the evenings. To my surprise, the number of customers nearly doubled. I was so shocked by the huge response that I inadvertently shared the news with my mother-in-law. I was like, "Thanks to you kicking me out, the cafe is doing better than ever. Thanks for giving me this opportunity," but it seemed to come off as sarcasm to my mother-in-law. I'll never forget the look on my mother-in-law's face when I told her about the cafe's success. Her lips were tight and her eyes weren't smiling. In the end, we had my mother-in-law stay at the closest senior facility. Although the cost was higher compared to other places, it was known for its excellent services. Despite the past tensions, I never wished any ill on my mother-in-law. I'm actually thankful for her raising my husband to be the man he is. So when it came to choosing a facility for her, I wanted to find the best possible place. Being somewhat forced into the facility, I heard my mother-in-law was causing a lot of trouble there. Whenever I visited, I was told she had issues with other residents. The reasons for these disputes were minor things, like making eye contact or speaking too loudly. She often clashed with other residents, but fortunately, it never reached a point where they'd kick her out. They ended up isolating her from the others. The staff kept me updated about my mother-in-law's situation. Initially, my mother-in-law was quite spirited, but about 6 months into her stay, I was told she seemed to lose her energy. She probably felt lonely without talking to others. Recently, with the help of the staff, I received a report that she's now able to converse well with other residents. However, it seems my mother-in-law's nature hasn't changed, and due to her bad attitude, she was evicted from the facility. Although she moved to another facility, she ended up isolated and her loneliness seemed to intensify, possibly leading to dementia. It's a bit sad that she had to be separated from her son, my husband. Still, if it ensures everyone's peace, it might be for the best. Now, I live in Europe with my husband. My husband, who had been traveling abroad more frequently for work, recently said he wouldn't be able to return home for about a month. Then, he suggested he'd like to take me abroad with him. I run a cafe and thought I couldn't possibly leave, but luckily 2 of my student workers were graduating, so I decided to close the cafe and follow my husband. I dreamed of running a restaurant abroad and set off for Europe. At first, the language barrier was tough, and I mostly stayed home. But after making friends in the neighborhood, my perspective changed. A friend got me a job at the local grocery store, and gradually, I was able to communicate better. Eventually, I decided to open a small cafe in a corner of a town. We had a house back in Oregon which was still being mortgaged. We contemplated whether to sell it or not, but due to some false rumors in the neighborhood, we sold it to fund the new cafe. Thanks to the many acquaintances I'd made, a lot of people visited on the opening day. It was also promoted on social media as a homey cafe run by an American, and some customers even came all the way from the US. The reason I started the cafe was that I managed to get permanent residency in Europe. The reason my husband was traveling more was that he was getting more work opportunities abroad than in the US. My husband's company proposed relocating him to their branch in Europe, so we just ended up settling there. He eventually quit that job, but in his new job, he seems to be really shining. And is now earning about the same as I am. When we were like, we've settled down here in Europe, and with both of us, it's hard to figure out where to use our money. To our surprise, we found out we were expecting. We were told natural conception would be difficult, but it feels like a gift from above. Raising a child will be challenging, but I believe my husband and I will manage. We can't wait to meet our baby, even though the due date is a way off. The town I live in is filled with friendly folks, and when I shared the news of my pregnancy, everyone was genuinely thrilled for me. I believe that in this environment, our child will surely have a happy life.